Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Solar Embrace, Chapter 10. The reason I've been putting this off is I haven't had the time. Usually these readings take about an hour or so, since they consist of around 8,000 words. Same goes for this one. So, take a seat, grab some popcorn, and put on, I don't know, whatever you like to do. And be ready. Everything's going downhill. In Ponyville, 6 friends were gathered at the Ponyville Library. They had been doing this every day ever since they had seen Spike off with Princess Celestia. The possibility of the world ending tends to put a damper on festivities, and even though the rest of Equestria had nothing, or knew nothing of what might happen, these 6 had managed to keep their composure so far. It had been tough, of that they were sure. Not even Applejack's family knew, and keeping it from them was harder for them than the others, what being the element of honesty and all. "Girls, I know we have no idea what is going on out there with Celestia and Spike," Twilight began, looking at her circle of friends. "They are likely off doing something extremely dangerous and important to save the world. I trust they can save it. I believe without a doubt they can, but I've been doing some observations of the sun with my filtered telescope, and these calculations I've deduced that not exactly good." "What do you mean, Twilight?" Applejack asked, fiddling with her braided mane. She usually did whenever they gathered for these meetings. If only because she was itching to get something done. She was always busy, or trying to be busy, that Applejack. "Well, based on a spike in the sunspot emergence, an increase in certain solar wind activity, and several other influential factors, I believe Celestia's calculations may have been a bit off as to the occurrence of the event she told us about. You know how she said there were several weeks left before the possibility of the end?" "Yes," Rarity said slowly, unsure of what her friend meant. "I believe she said 3, to be exact. And they haven't been gone for more than a week. Why? What do the signs indicate?" "Well, these signs, they all point to this happening much sooner than anticipated." Twilight sounded rather down. Understandable, given the circumstances. "How much sooner?" Fluttershy asked. Her animal friends had seemed on the edge, even though she hadn't told any of them about the event. Perhaps they could tell something was wrong, as the sun-induced weather in the Everfree Forest had been rather odd lately. Even the clouds around Ponyville had been a tad troublesome recently. Something Rainbow Dash had been very glad to share with every pony else, though she did not tell every pony else of the elements of harmony exactly why. "Within days, not weeks," the Purple Unicorn said. "In fact, I would say within the next 3 days, to be precise. It would happen within 10 hours, for all we know. I think of any observation that would give me a clearer answer." "I hope Celestia and Spike know about this," Rarity said softly. "Who knows what they could be doing right now?" Terrible and awe-inspiring images raced through the minds of the mares: a prehistoric crater, a thick jungle, or terribly vast mountain range, and perhaps every ancient monument in the world of an unforgiving desert. I'd send them a letter if I could, but Celestia wasn't able to teach me the magic of sending Spike a letter as she does," the purple mare said softly. "I doubt they'd have any time to send us anything anyway. They're probably in terrible danger as it is, or else in the middle of something incredibly important." Meanwhile, on the island, "Spike, how did you get so good at this?" Celestia asked between moans, as the dragon kneaded one of her breasts with one hand and her tired neck with the other. Her toned rump rested against his abdomen, her soft wings pressed against his chest, and his long shaft protruded out from underneath her, which she was gently stroking with one hand. The other was teasing the soft scales of his balls, which had slightly shrunken from all the times he had thus ejaculated under her stimulation. "Well, the massaging part, that was from helping the Spa twins on busy days and when I needed "The money," Spike replied between pants of his own, Celestia's soft fingers making heat pools in his belly. "You'd be surprised how many mares need a good neck massage after a long day at work. Any of your friends receive one?" the alicorn asked, her loins burning after being filled with Spike's fingers as they had been doing not long ago. How long had they been exploring each other's bodies like this? 2 hours? 3? Time passed by rather quickly when they were having this much fun. And for Celestia, even in the midst of the impending solar-related crisis, was having a blast. She had been wrong to not seek out a sexual partner in all her time as one of Equestria's princesses, to think she had been missing out on things like this for all these years. No, though I did give Fluttershy a hoof rub after she fell sick helping those squirrels in a rainstorm. Spike snapping her out of her personal thoughts. She really liked it since she fell asleep soon after I finished. Sounds like a good way to help a friend, Celestia said, moaning softly as Spike's kneading hands circled and lightly pinched her puffy nipple. "Spike, yes?" the dragon asked, as his massaging hand pressed his thumb firmly but gently into the princess's lower back, sending a wave after wave of soothing relief into the lower back muscles. Having gone this long without supporting dress to carry her load, Celestia was surely feeling a bit of strain holding up her large breasts. After all, the body can only adapt to form for so long before it begins to trim away the excess, so to speak, and as such her lower back muscles were not as developed as they would have been. She had been naked for months on end. The thought of Celestia almost permanently naked made Spike's cock twitch slightly harder than it had. Do you think we should get to the alcove I told you about?" the princess asked. The rain stopped a while ago, and surely it wouldn't take us long to get there." "Oh, do we have to?" Spike asked, the grip ever so slightly tightening on him, showing she meant business. Okay, I give." "I'd think it best," she said, letting go altogether and pushing herself onto her hooves and out of his lap. "Come now. We must continue this later." Spike's engorged dick agreed with her sentiments. "Okay, I guess so," he said, standing up himself, "though when we get there, we'd better get something to eat. All this experimenting has made me hungry," he added, giving her luscious rump a light tap or slap. The bracelet his friend had given him was the only thing she wore, and it jingled slightly as they walked. "Indeed," the princess said with a giggle, as she watched the dragon pack up their food. If her calculations about the alcove were correct, then they would find more than enough food and water to sustain them until well after the end of their mission. After all, it was a retreat within a retreat, a sanctuary on this sanctuary of an island, if you will, and it was plainly bountiful from the air as they had passed overhead only a few days ago. So the pair of them walked, their bodies gradually winding down from the heightened states of awareness brought on by their now mutual arousals. However, for Celestia, a thought had entered her mind that she wasn't sure she felt comfortable sharing with her soon-to-be lover. Now, she knew that no more secrets would be between them, and eventually she'd tell Spike about Alicorn history, or at least the grist of it. But their upcoming union would provide them with a problem she sincerely did not know how to cope with. Pregnancy. There was a chance, after all, that after all was said and done she could wind up pregnant. Having sex during her cycle didn't necessarily mean she'd get pregnant, as many ponies throughout both history and Equestria could have sex during their heat and not conceive. She, however, was a different case altogether. She was an alicorn, a creature of the stars with magic and might, so unlike those of natural creatures of Earth normally. This, coupled with the fact that her parents would eventually want grandfoals, meant she'd have to have her own foals someday, and to be honest, she did want them. She wanted to be a mother, even if it meant more than complications in her life, and with those complications could arise several problems within Equestria she had been managing to put off for many, many years. Mainly succession and heredity, titles, and such. But when she was younger, she'd envisioned her partner being an Alicorn stallion, as her father had been for her mother, and so on, so forth. She had never expected circumstances would lead to her potential partner being a dragon, of all things. She never expected to be falling head over hooves for him either. "Is this love?" she whispered to herself as they walked on, their steps clambering slowly, but methodically, over the steeper incline of the rocky slopes. The grasses were behind them, and all that met their paces was gravel and the occasional bit of moss. "Is this what I feel when I'm around him?" Celestia had known many ponies over centuries, some better than others, and she had liked so many of them in so many different ways. Yet with Spike she couldn't help but notice how she felt was off when compared to the others. When he was around her heart beat like a little quicker. Her breath was a bit short when she touched her, and when they slept side by side she knew a peace she would never have known alone in the Canterlot bed. He was intoxicating to her now, and as much as she wanted it to be true, if only for the sake, if not wanting either of them to be hurt, she knew it wasn't her heat talking. She innately knew that her attraction to this was absolutely fine and virile specimen of a dragon, and male at that, was deeper than just the physical need and want, which actually were two different things. No, she also desired Spike in ways that weren't sexual in the slightest. She wanted to be close to him, to both protect and be protected by him. She wanted to know his darkest secrets, and him hers. She wanted to teach him the ways of Alicorn royalty, and in turn to be taught by him the ways of common folk of dragons. Yes, there was no doubt about it. Celestia was falling in love with Spike. Hard. But with the love came a risk of hurt, something she didn't ever want to happen. Even if they fell madly in love, and made it out of all this unscathed and unburdened with a pregnancy, their relationship would never be the same. It never could be the same, after all. How could any pony go back to be a similarly previous relationship after having sex and sharing their deepest secrets with one another? A relationship of subject and ruler, where the lines between social classes and society roles was not only stark but subtly enforced by the country. How could any go back to that? The stress of it all would likely tear them apart, and Celestia didn't want to hurt Spike. She knew if he was hurt enough by what would happen after all this, he'd become something unlike what he was. He'd no longer be a cheerful, brave, kind, and gentle soul he was. He'd become aggressive, sullen, cold, and distant. He would become a stranger to both his friends and to Celestia herself, and that horrified the princess. She would lose one she had come to care for, to love, and if that happened, surely she would fall into a despair that would mark Luna's transformation seem like a childish tantrum. He would still be there in body, but in mind and spirit he would be dead to her, and she would likely follow suit. "The dangers of love," she muttered softly as they continued on. Her parents had warned her all those years ago about the follies and preconceived notions of love. She had always thought it to be something beautiful and mysterious, unending and irreplaceable. But she had learned over the centuries, though countless observations, that love always came with a price and its own hardships. The question was she willing to let Spike in and help her weather the storm of such a love? Was she willing to share in the load that society, of both the earth and celestial, would thrust upon them? Perhaps more importantly, if she did wind up pregnant, what would their offspring look like? Equal parts dragon and alicorn, or an odd combination of the two? What would it be, a filly or a colt? How would they raise it? Who would be the godparents, and who would help oversee the wedding, if they did indeed become married, regardless of whether it was before or after a birth? Such questions thankfully replaced some of the other more dour ones in her head, but one little nagging thought kept emerging in the Alicorn's head. If she did indeed become pregnant, certain steps would have to be taken to not only ensure the survival of her child, but that of Spike as well. Granted, most ponies wouldn't give a flying hoop about it if Celestia had a foal with a dragon, and it was extremely hard to kill a dragon anyways, but there were always those purists out there who insisted Pegasi breed Pegasi, unicorn make unicorns, and earth ponies stick with earth ponies. The only thing was, what would they have to say about alicorns? Well, whatever they do say, it'll likely be of no concern once Mom and Dad come for a visit, Celestia muttered to herself. If they nigh worshipped herself or Luna, Celestia would only imagine the awe and worshipping nature that would sweep the country should her own parents show up. The thought of seeing her parents did fill the princess with joyful feelings, even for an alicorn whose lifespan was measured in millennias. Time away from loved ones could still be viewed as an unhappy circumstance. She had not seen her parents since her first heat, when she left Earth behind to ask them about it, and Luna had not seen them since they had come to Equestria in the first place. Of course, Celestia had been quick to tell her parents of Luna's fall and eventual redemption, something they had both not expected but did not interfere with. Interfering with the rule of their daughters was strictly prohibited by the council. For how else would Celestia and Nuria learn and grow in wisdom and understanding if some pony held their hand the whole way through their rule? Happy thoughts aside, Celestia knew her parents would want to see the grandfoal within a few weeks of the birth, and would likely like to visit every few months or years, depending on how busy their schedules were. Luckily for Celestia, marriages in Alicorn society were more than a symbolic statement that one of their both partners were off the market, so to speak, and not a special stigma delegating the end of one's single life. Still, it was generally frowned upon if one was especially promiscuous and never took responsibility for their resulting offspring, regardless of of their own gender. Her parents were no exception, and while she wouldn't have to marry Spike right away, they would not be too happy if he never popped the question. Her parents would still be traditionalist pair, where a stallion could propose. Only thing was, if Spike did indeed do that, what would the present as a gift? But along the lines of actual having a foal, it wouldn't exactly be a precedent. Alicorns and dragons had occasionally had offspring together in the many years they had known one another, and dragons had literally bred with everything living on Earth at least once. But those dragons that had bred with alicorns had been ascended to their celestial forms, as had the alicorns, and as such the hybrid had not been much more powerful at old age than at birth. Spike was not ascended, and as such an offspring, they would need to go through the ascension process, since they would only inherit Celestia's half-ascended side. She didn't have it, or have to be in her ascended form to pass it on. But Spike's unascendedness could pose a problem if the foal did indeed ascend, since he too would have to do it in order to make the ritual complete. But enough of ascension and foals and visiting alicorn parents. Celestia had one little thing to focus on, and that thing was all this would do to a certain group of ponies. The only other real problem she saw was how Spike's friends would react to the news. He had not only had a hot, steamy sex with Celestia of all ponies, just to save the world, but had also begotten her with a foal, if he did, in this meantime. Now, there was something she'd likely never predict accurately. Of all them, Twilight's reaction would likely be the loudest. Her faithful student had always been, or had a knack of raising an uproar, if even by herself, over things others might not feel so strongly about. Little did the alicorn know, Spike was having thoughts that eerily mirrored her own. "It won't be long now," Spike said softly, as they worked their way up a winding, almost staircase-like path up the volcano. "Her heat's coming early. What if I'm not ready?" Truth be told, Spike was still rather terrified of the idea of having actual penis insert into vagina sex with Celestia. He had to admit he must have so far been doing a remarkably good job of sexual pleasing her, but the prospect of him actually sealing the deal had him worried. Sure, his stamina problems was beginning to sort it out himself, what with all those bouts of sexy time, but he still knew him finishing early could be disastrous for them both. For instance, say her heat did fire up a bit early into the session and her more aggressive side would refuse that he was done so quickly. The love-making would likely turn into something more resembling of rape, and Spike didn't like rape. Rape was bad, very bad. He wanted Celestia to be the one who he was marking love in her to, not some hormonally crazy all-powerful alicorn whose heat could destroy all life on Earth. He also didn't want to contemplate in those throes of her heat she would change into something far more resembling what he guessed would have been her celestial form. He'd likely not be up to the task then, so if he did finish early, and she did fall into the state of worse, there was only one thing he could do: keep on plowing into her like he hadn't stopped. Yes, that would be the best plan he could take or think of it. Should Celestia go heat crazy and possibly ascend, or something, he would have to keep on going until she was satiated, or he collapsed from lack of energy. Either way, he'd likely have a heart attack from such a strenuous task, and even if he didn't, he'd be so sore he likely couldn't have sex for a long while. So, to save the world and himself from a potentially harmonial crazy goddess like Mare, he'd have to lose all inhibitions and fuck her like a beast. Well, wouldn't he put it that way? "Spike?" Celestia called out, temporarily snapping him out of his thoughts. "Yes?" he said as he looked back. He hadn't realized he was climbing up onto a stone slab jutting out from the alcove. He was even more surprised that he had even reached there so soon. "Could you help me up?" the princess asked, extending a hand upwards. "I'll flap my wings a bit, if that helps." "Sure, yeah, here," the dragon said, leaning down and grabbing onto her offered hand, which was slowly but steadily heaved over the edge, her large flapping wings most definitely helping. However, Spike overcorrected her for her weight, and soon the two tumbled over on top of one another, on top of the slab. "Spike, I must say you don't know your own strength," the mare said with a giggle as she rose to her hooves. She was just so cheery after their sexual games, it made her feel all tingly inside. "Yeah, well, I'm glad to see your wings work again," the dragon said as he stood up as well. "Though I gotta ask, how are you going to get off the island when all this is said and done?" "Well, originally we were going to take my carriage back, but you're right to wonder that," Celestia said as they continued on. "No pony knows where the island is, and could get lost looking for it. I definitely can't carry you back while flying, and I most certainly won't have you become some giant dragon and swim us back." "Why not? That sounds kind of reasonable," Spike said. "For starters, Spike, if you indeed became a giant dragon, I have no doubt it would be so great a struggle for you to try and control it, you wouldn't be able to focus on swimming and would likely sink and revert to your normal size," the princess said. "If anything, we'll have to construct a boat of some kind, perhaps a simple sailboat. My magic is nearly at full power, but the distance to transport us magically is far too great, in case you were wondering." "So a sailboat it is," the dragon said as they passed some patches of grass. They must have been nearing the alcove, as the rocks had given way to soft silt and dirt. "Do you know how to work one?" His thought resumed, and strangely they were not still focused on the possible problems of their future relationship, but on the positive aspects. As He had figured out before, by the time the rumor mill had run its course, he would be one of the most sought-after creatures in all of Equestria, especially by mares, who wouldn't want to go to bed with the only creature to ever pleasure Celestia. Sure, he had thought of this before, and realized he was a tad selfish for thinking this way, but he now realized it did open up the door for him he hadn't thought of. If he were to move in with Celestia and indeed live with her, he'd be moving out of the library and leaving Twilight. While that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, what with him living in a palace of all places, it would definitely change not only his relationship with Twilight, but indeed with all those elements of harmony. Maybe he could go or get Celestia to purchase him a small villa or something on the outskirts of Ponyville, heading up to the mountains. He always liked the part of towns. Maybe his inner dragon just liked the geology. I would be able to enchant it to sail itself, so yes, said Princess Celestia, in her melodious voice, snapping the dragon out of the line of thought for good. However, there is still an issue of us. Us how? Spike asked. Maybe asking for a villa would be too much. What about a nice cottage, or a refurbished cave fit enough for any pony to live in or visit? He'd read all about early pony settlers making quite nice homes built into hillsides, so why not something similar with a cave? Maybe in Canterlot he could even fix up those vast caves underneath the palace where Chrysalis had imprisoned Twilight and Cadence. He'd need lots of help, though. Well, we're not fit for civilization, you see, the princess said with a slight blush. After all their time together completely naked, you'd think she was over it, but no, there was still that thrill of seeing such a taboo as being naked with Spike and arriving on Equestria's shores as such. Perhaps ponies would react so badly if they came ashore in something a bit more decent. I'll be sure to make us some clothes as well with my magic. As it stands, other than my crown and your bracelet, we are completely unclothed. Yeah, I guess I see your point, the dragon said, rubbing the back of his neck in a slightly awkward manner. I don't think too many ponies would make a fuss about you being naked, but me, I'd never hear the end of it from Twilight, forever embarrassing her and her family since they taught me better manners than that. The same goes if we were seen together naked. Do you think ponies could guess what we were up to out here? Likely, as Equestria is not overly populated by dimwits, Celestia said. Plenty would be able to connect the dots, but that does not concern me, Spike. It doesn't? The dragon asked. Sure, the upper class would gossip about it for a while, but if there were common knowledge, then who knew just what the rest of the country would think? Better yet, just what would his friends think? No, Spike, the princess replied as they strolled past some small shrubs and trees. They must have been nearly there, as they could hear the falling of water not too far off. No, Spike, I am less worried about what society will do, and more about how your friends will react to all of this. Yeah, I was thinking that too, Spike said. I mean, I know Pinky and Fluttershy probably wouldn't be too bothered, and Rainbow Dash might even joke about it or tell me, attaboy, or something. Applejack might not be too happy I wasn't honest with them about it all, and Rarity, she'd either see me as a way into Canterlot's innermost circles, or not react at all. But Twilight. You're afraid of what she might say, the Alicorn said, finishing the dragon's sentence for him. After all this time together, even for only a few days, it was becoming evident that they were sharing a bond far stronger than they might have first guessed. More along the lines of what she might do, the dragon replied. I mean, we're close, but lately I've felt she's less like family and more like a really good friend. I mean, come on. I was never raised by her after I was hatched. Her parents did that, and my name is Spike. Spike. It's a name more suited for that of a pet than a brother, right? I cannot praise Twilight's ability to give a name in her younger years. And though the name suits you, Spike, I can see your point. Twilight views you as a close friend as well. To keep this secret from her would indeed likely hurt that relationship very much, Celestia said. The sad thing is, she likely wouldn't be angry at me for keeping it from her, as she is my student and is far more willing to let my faults and failures slide than he is or she is of yours. I'm afraid most of the kingdom is like that, anyway. Only you, Cadence, and Luna know the real truth. Hey, come on, every pony has faults, and you are no different than any other ponies, Spike said, trying to soothe the princess as they came upon the alcove. All around them, fruits of all kinds hung from trees, and a small babbling brook of clean water wound through the grasses, boulders, and shrubs. The ground was covered with a moss and tiny mushrooms, but they were not slippery, perhaps due to all the other foliage soaking up the excess moisture in the air. Sunlight shone in most of it, and yet there were still plenty of enclosed spaces to take shelter from rain and wind. If Spike could have built a small cottage anywhere, it would in the world, and still be able to visit Ponyville as often as he liked, then here is where he would have wanted it. But no other pony's faults can destroy a world like mine can, the princess said softly, as they came into a well-concealed spot within the alcove. I was tasked by my parents to help the ponies of this country, and by example the world, lead better lives and live in harmony. What sort of hypocrite am I to just fall victim to a biological function after stressing the need for heat control and parenting testing? How could I look at my subjects in their eyes, knowing that, should this succeed, I almost ended them all? Hey, come on now. Don't say things like that. You were just feeling bad for something you made a mistake about, the dragon said, gently turning her to face him. You just... Oh my. Celestia knew that look in Spike's eyes, surprising a hint of fear. She had seen the same look before, not too long ago that. What is it, she asked, quickly. Your eyes, they're pink again, Spike said, unintentionally taking a small step back. Are you feeling okay? I don't know, maybe, the alicorn responded, her lower body tingling strangely. We'll just wait for it to pass while we eat, all right? She didn't feel angry, or horny, or anything else, really. The feeling in her lower body was more excited than anything else, and for the rest of her, she had no idea why. And if it doesn't, the dragon asked, arching an eyebrow, as he slowly lowered their food bag into the soft grasses below. Maybe if he didn't make any sudden movement, she wouldn't lunge for his junk. There was no telling what the heat-crazed Celestia would do, since he was the only male within who knew how many hundreds of miles. Then I guess we'll have to find a way to make it stop, the princess said softly, setting herself down next to her soon-to-be lover. Could you pass me a sugar cane? I never knew how sex like this could be such exhausting endeavor. Yeah, well, if anything, it's only going to be more strenuous for us both, Spike said, as he bit into the mango. Tell me, Celestia, what happens between us after all of this? All of what? Asked the princess, not sure as to which exact subject the dragon was talking about. You know, after the whole save the world through sex thing, the dragon said after he swelled. What happens after that, assuming we've already left the island and made it back in one piece? The alicorn went silent for a few moments as she softly chewed on a few berries. Well, she began, striking a thoughtful pose, I do believe we would have to inform Luna of what transpired, if only for the sake of sating her curiosity. I would likely do most of the talking, though, since she's never been rutted either during a heat phase or at all, really. So naturally, she'd be curious as to the experience. Maybe I shouldn't be in the room when you talk about it, Spike said, managing to hide a small blush that was forming. You know, sisterly conversations and all that, I'd be out of place. I suppose you're right, Spike. But after my sister and niece... Wait, you'd want to tell Cadence too, the dragon asked, arching an eyebrow in surprise. Cadence wasn't notorious or anything for sharing gossip, but the same could not be said for her husband, Shining Armor. He had gossiped more at the academy with his bunkmates than any other recruit, or so Spike had heard from Twilight. Yes, of course. I see no reason not to, Celestia replied. She is my niece, after all, and would need to be brought up on the political developments our liaison would not assuredly cause. Politics would be an important factor in any further decision we would make together, Spike. I understand, Luna, but Cadence? Would you go to the Crystal Empire to do that? Spike asked. Likely not, was the reply. Now, after Luna and Cadence, there would be the issue of my parents What? Your parents? Spike asked, his voice raising in pitch just a little bit more than he would have liked. You'd have to tell them that soon? Well, no, not exactly, the princess said, with a rather amused grin. They would come for a visit, most likely, though when they would arrive would be entirely up to how busy their schedule would be. The thought of meeting Celestia's parents made Spike suddenly doubt he could do this. Even if he did save the world, how could he prepare himself to meet the parents of his lover? A pair of alicorns who must have been many thousands of years old and sat on some high council of their kind. The world intimidated likely wouldn't do justice to Spike's behavior and their presence. He'd be lucky if he didn't grovel like an idiot or just faint dead away. Spike, a voice said, causing the dragon to snap out of his thoughts. Spike, are you okay? You seemed out of it a bit there, the princess said as she bit into another piece of sugar cane. No, I was just thinking, he said in reply. So after talking to Luna and Cadence and he shuddered slightly, parents, who would we tell next, if at all, my friends? I was thinking so, but I wanted your opinion on the matter, Celestia said. Your friends are like family to you, or at least most of them are. Tell me, are you afraid of how they might react should we both tell them the news? Well, you see, I'm not worried about how they'd react if we told them, since you're the princess and they would understand that this needed to happen. But if you weren't there, they'd likely bombard me with questions I'd rather not answer, or even worse, treat me differently for doing so, the dragon said. They're my friends, but how would they react knowing I had sex with you, of all ponies, in order to save the world? Surely you can imagine the fallout that could hang around me, like some cloud whenever I was with them. That's not even factoring in the rumor mill that could somehow come out of this. And then, proof my life would never be the same. Neither of our lives will be the same after this, Spike, Celestia said, a peculiar itch emanating from her lower body. All this talk of them having sex was working her up, but not in a horny way, more in a problem that needed relieving way. Your life will change more than my own, but I would have to help show you the ropes, as they say, for you to make the best of it. There's no telling how your friends or my family will react to this, so for the time being, let's not think too much of the future, all right? Yeah, sounds good to me, Spike said, swallowing a couple of cherries. They sat in silence for a while longer until Spike noticed something odd with the princess. More specifically, she seemed to be suddenly grinding her hips against the ground, and she didn't even seem to realize it. Celestia? Yes, Spike? The princess asked, and now Spike could see it. Her pink eyes were there, and the flushing of her cheeks, and the slight pant when she spoke, the subtle grinding. She was becoming very horny, and it seemed just eating and talking hadn't done anything to calm her wild side. Are you feeling all right? The dragon asked. Now that you mention it, I do feel a bit funny, she said, with a giggle, rolled onto her back, and her wings fanning out to the side like massive sails on the ships, her legs spread slightly, exposing her core, something with droplets leaking out of her lower edges. Do you think you could, help me out as a favor between friends? Well, technically they were lovers, but to be considered a friend of Celestia was not something every pony could lay claim to. Anyway, who in their right mind could resist a request like that, especially with that pouting face she was making as she gently arched her back, her breasts bobbing slightly on her chest. Spike's heart rate possibly doubled right then and there. Still, he forced himself to at least try to remain calm. No sense in going overboard with this. She just needed some help down there. Was all right. Nothing too difficult for Spike. Crawling over slightly, Spike propped himself up on his knees so that he could rest his elbow on the princess's own knees. Should he grow tired. So, spreading the creamy white legs a bit farther apart, the dragon got to work, starting off with a slow massage up and down the interior of the alicorn's thighs. That feels good, Celestia crooned, some of her syllables blurred again together as the rest were drawn out in a long moan. Her hands came up gently, cupped her own breasts, if only to stop them from jiggling with every breath. I bet, Spike said, his fingers pressing gently into the white pelt. Have you ever had a massage like this before? Never, the princess said simply. I've had back massages and such, but something like this, it was just too embarrassing for me to contemplate. She peered through the valley of her breasts at him. You would make a fortune with those fingers, Spike. I'll have to keep that in mind, the dragon said as his fingers inched closer and closer to the princess's dripping core. It was puffed up and leaking, those same fluids he had tasted from her during their last little eating game, only the day before. His own saliva began to be produced in earnest, but he managed to keep himself from drooling at the beautiful sight. Soon enough, his fingers gently traced tiny circles around the outside of Celestia's exposed core, and gently he began to rub that strange little bump that had appeared. Like a firecracker, Celestia felt her nerves had exploded, her body twitching in response in the dragon's ministrations. Even though he was merely grazing at something, pinching with the utmost care, to the princess it was like she had been set on fire. She loved it. Are you all right, princess? Spike asked with a smirk, noticing the look on her face. In all their time together, Spike was becoming better and better at reading the princess's body language, something he never really had timed before all this. I thought we agreed you could call me by my name. Celestia choked out her lover, rubbed her little nub. It was taking all of her focus just to talk and breathe at the same time, and even that was becoming rather difficult. Okay, Celestia, but are you all right? The dragon asked, his thumbs parting the folds that never more of her tender, unexplored flesh was exposed into the open air. As if on cue, a small draft fluttered between them. The princess shuddered slightly. Sex indoors might have been the norm of most, but all of this sex exploration seemed to be much more fitting for the pair of them. I'm just fine. Just keep going, she sputtered out, sounding as if her salivary glands were on overdrive, and she could barely swallow fast enough to speak. That her tongue had somehow been swollen with lust. Either way, she would be having a hard time speaking coherently. Smirking, the dragon leaned down and blew a gentle bit of air into her exposed petals before him, his hot breath washing over the princess like a warm blanket, only it seemed to go inside her, filling her whole body with a kind of warmth that any medicine seems like a joke in comparison. He kept on breathing softly into her, and to the princess it seemed as though every breath he sent into her was expelling some kind of air from her own lungs. Trouble was, she was having the hardest time remembering how and when to breathe. Then she felt the lips against the exposed core, and the alicorn princess squeezed her breast hard. The sudden pain of doing so mixed incredibly with the pleasure of that carnal bliss, and she arched her back as her dragon lover continued to kiss her lips, outer and inner, then back again to outer. Her head was spinning on her shoulders, around and around, and with no way of stopping. She even let go of her breast, her fingernails having left little trails of softness expanse on her pelt and grabbed onto the sides of her head, as if to try to stop the feeling of spinning. Remarkably, it seemed to work, but then something happened she was not been expecting. Something wet, wriggling, and very, very warm wriggled its way into her lower lips, barely going in an inch, but feeling as though it had penetrated her as far as her stomach. Looking down in shock, lust, and awe, Celestia saw Spike's tongue lazily worming its way further and further into her, small streams of her juices leaking out in a ribbon like invader. The forked tongue and the fork tips touched parts of her nothing else had. The texture of her tongue danced around in her insides like a whirlwind of flame. For all she knew, Celestia was dying, and yet she was more alive than she had ever felt. "Spike," she managed to croak out, and indeed it sounded like a croak. Like that sort of bullfrog, or toad, or even sexy leapfrog, or leopard frog. "What?" "Shh," the dragon had admonished, his words rumbling up his tongue, up into her body. Suffice to say, he was already hypersensitive. Nerves danced in her body like a carnival. "Just relax." Celestia would have done as he said, but something came over her, a force she knew she had or would come, but she had been holding back. Yes, her heat arrived, and as her eyes glowed a bright pink hue, she threw her head back and let out a throaty moan, taking her legs, and she looked back. And the dragon's head and pulled him closer, squishing her tongue and lips deep into her core. Her hand combed through her mane as the dragon started to make slurping noises. Maybe he had known it would happen, for he did not react of the sudden pressure. If anything else, the slurps became louder, almost obscenely so. "He's drinking me," the princess thought, her mind becoming increasingly addled as an unsatisfied heat was becoming satisfied. She could feel his tongue reach out and retreat, drawing with it the collective juices she had been producing. The erotic sight of his drinking her, lapping at her folds like a fellow dying of thirst, made Celestia's grip on the back of his head tighten. In a flash, the dragon's arms were under those powerful slender legs, and with one swift motion he stood up, his face towards the ground and buried in the princess's groin. Celestia, momentarily confused by the sudden reversal of position, steadied her upside-down body as her hands held on for dear life as the dragon continued to drink her dry. His arms shifted quickly so that one still held her by one leg, but the other wrapped around her waist. The natural curvature of her hips prevented her body from sliding out of his grip. She craned her neck to see his own arousal twitching, and she wanted to reach out with her tongue and give it a deeper taste, to give as good as she was getting. But she could not bend like that, or not, and so, as one last lap went deeper into her sopping core than any previous one she came. It was not simple little orgasm like the ones before, even though those had felt large. This one was something only dreamt about by both mares and erotic authors alike, a truly monstrous orgasm where the body went weak, the mind went blank, and the copious juices produced seemed to never end. The blood rushing to her head also gave her mind a little buzz, and the thought was just starting to see tiny spots. She didn't care. Spike greedily drank in the liquid that was positively pouring out of the princess, watching as it welled up like a freshwater spring and worked against the pull of gravity to spill out of her and drain down her pelt, his arms becoming weak from holding up her weight and keeping himself in place to drink her. He slowly sat down, his tail sneaking between his legs, and his lower, softer pad to lower himself down onto. Finally, he managed to pry himself out of her legs and lay her off to the side, where she convulsed slightly and panted as though she had just run 4 miles in as many seconds. "So, feeling better?" the dragon asked, his long and utterly dexterous tongue flickering out his chin and cheeks to get every last drop of her sweet, earthy juices. He could get used to giving her a treatment like that. She tasted absolutely delicious to him. The pinkish glow from Celestia's eyes was indeed gone, but all she could do was wheeze and smile like an idiot. That, and blink every now and then. Maybe he had broken her or something. Spike didn't know anything or about oversensitivity when it came to sex, but he could sure tell that whatever he was doing to her, she had loved it. If some pony had told him before all of this that the nectar of a mare's petals tasted so good, he'd have likely said they were gross and flat out rejecting the idea. Now, though, he saw merit in doing something like this. If she gave as good as he did, or if she gave as good as she did, then how much better would it be for him to repay her, if also in kind? Surely there was a benefit to trying to one-up another in these sexual games, other than the sex. Maybe there was some sort of dominance-related hierarchy that could only be bestowed on the one that was better. Nah, the dragon thought to himself as he laid his princess, curling his arms over her protectively as she faded off into dreamland. Why decide who is dominant or better when it is far more pleasurable to just give one another what you can with no strings attached? This wasn't some competition. It was a partnership between two souls who had never really known much in ways of physical love. Now that they had each other, there was no telling just how far this could go, or for how long. They both needed immensely long-lived species, and they needed to save the world and go back to Equestria and tell every pony they planned to tell about what had transpired. Just how long would their relationship last? A century? 2, 3, a millennia, perhaps? Or he did not grow too large for them to enjoy the physical activities. Surely a relationship couldn't be extensively put entirely on mind-blowing sex now, or else every pony's relationship would fall when their partners grew too old for such things. But all of what was thrust to one side when Spike came to a starting realization. If Celestia did indeed become pregnant, not only would he have a foal to help raise, but he'd be a father, an actual honest-to-goodness father, and he would live his life caring for and watching their foal grow up. In spite of the small fear impossible fatherhood presented, the young dragon Spike managed to eventually drift off to sleep with a small smile, the warmth and softness of Celestia's wings erasing his concern. They could worry about all of that some other time. Right now, he just wanted to lay there, with her and sleep, knowing peace in one another's arms. Far off in the vast reaches of the cosmos, the sun spun as it always did, but for the first time in a very long time it was beginning to act strangely. It seemed far less composed and far more ready to just go off at a moment's notice. It would not be long now, and if the one who was connected to it did not fulfill both her destiny and, unknowingly, that of her lover, then the world would indeed burn in starlight. Author's note, finally. More developed and more sex, and it seems Celestia's computer thingy hidden in her castle was off in its calculations. Oh well, 4 chapters to go. And then the story shall have reached the end. Stay tuned. Also, I would sorely appreciate some honest-to-goodness feedback. What you like about the story, what you don't like, the thoughts on the characters and the universe, etc. Please, things like this help me make me a better writer. And in turn, I can churn out better stories for your viewing pleasures. Oh my god. Almost an hour. Pure reading. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Have a wonderful day. And, Good God, peace off.